Rain had a way of clinging to London when sorrow wished to make itself known. It settled in a fine mist over the gas lamps and cobblestones, dulling the world into shades of pewter and ash. On such an afternoon, she stood outside the dressmaker's window, her shawl pulled close against the chill, though the cold she felt was not the kind that crept from the weather. Two women, once her acquaintances, perhaps even friends, lingered under the same awning, pretending not to notice her. Their eyes flicked toward her all the same, their voices lowered just enough to sting. "Her father left nothing, you know," one murmured. "A gentleman in title only. Unpaid debts, empty promises, and a daughter left to wander." "And the engagement?" the other asked, as though inquiring after the weather. "Broken." The groom's family discovered the situation. Several days before the wedding, no less. Tragic, but what can one expect? Men of standing have expectations. The words hung in the damp air like smoke from a dying fire. She kept her chin lifted, though her fingers tightened on her shawl. If she met their eyes, they would see something crack. The street bustled around her, carriages rolling over wet stone, vendors calling softly from beneath dripping canvas. But she felt the world narrowing to that single moment of being looked at and then deliberately dismissed, as though she were simply already fading from memory. Her father had passed only 3 months earlier, leaving behind not legacy but ledger books stained with red ink. The estate seized, the fine furniture sold, her name spoken now with pity, not warmth. And the man she once thought she would marry had offered one final, carefully worded letter. "This union is no longer feasible." Feasible. As though affection were something measured in coin. She stepped away from the window, letting the mist gather on her lashes as she made her way down the street. She had no destination except the one necessity had forced upon her, the carriage house where a posting board listed work for those who could no longer afford pride. Inside, the room smelled of damp wool and horsehair. Voices murmured over opportunities that varied from difficult to degrading. She searched for anything that did not require brute strength, deception, or desperation. There, among notices for kitchen maids and laundresses, lay a freshly pinned parchment. Caretaker sought for infant at Hawthorne Hall. Discretion required. Immediate placement. Generous wage. The name stirred a faint recollection. Hawthorne Hall belonged to a duke. A recent tragedy. A death in childbirth, whispered behind fans and in the back pews of chapels. A wife buried before the child had even grown strong enough to cry loudly. The household, it was said, had fallen into quiet gloom. The Duke himself, young still, though marked now with loss, had not left the estate since the funeral. Some said grief had turned him ghost-like. Others believed he was haunted. She touched the posting gently. A caretaker. She had no experience with infants. Yet something in the stillness of that estate called to her, perhaps the recognition of ruin meeting ruin. The carriage ride to Hawthorne Hall took the better part of the afternoon. The rain persisted, soft but unceasing, as if the sky, too, mourned. The hall rose from the moorlands like a memory of grandeur, a sweeping facade of gray stone softened by ivy, the windows tall and dark, their glass reflecting only clouds. It was not unwelcoming. It was simply solemn. A butler, stiff with propriety and sympathy held in rigid restraint, led her through echoing halls. Portraits lined the walls, ancestral faces watching silently, their oil-painted eyes knowing too much. The scent of beeswax polish and extinguished hearths settled heavy in the air. No laughter. No music. Only the whisper of her own footsteps. They reached a small sitting room where the child lay in a carved cradle. A tiny bundle, swaddled carefully, cheeks pale as early snow. A nurse hovered nearby, though her eyes flickered with unease. The child, a boy, had not cried properly for days. His breaths came soft, shallow, as though the world itself frightened him. Only then did the Duke enter. He did not stride nor announce himself. He simply appeared in the doorway, his presence more felt than seen at first. Tall, shoulders cut with a rigid elegance of breeding, yet his face carried exhaustion etched too deeply for his age. His eyes, not cold, but shuttered, rested briefly on the child before lifting to the woman who had come to seek work in his grief-shadowed home. "You have arrived sooner than expected." His voice was low, smooth, though weighted. The carriage roads are unforgiving in this weather." "Yes, your grace," she answered, dipping her head. Her voice surprised her. It held steadiness she did not quite feel. There was no condescension in his gaze, yet no warmth either. He studied her as one might examine the seam of a garment, assessing strength, suitability, risk. "The child is unwell," he said, the slightest catch halting his words. "Not in body. The physicians insist he is sound. But he refuses to be held by anyone. He will not drink. He barely sleeps. The nurse believes he stopped, the word grieves too heavy to speak aloud. She knelt beside the cradle. The child's small fingers curled, then trembled. He whimpered, not weakly but fearfully. She did not consider technique or propriety. She simply reached out, lifting him with a care born from instinct rather than knowledge. The child's tiny fists clung to her shawl, face pressing into her collarbone. The crying ceased. Not gradually, instantly. A shuddering breath, then quiet. The room stilled. The nurse made the sign of the cross. The butler swallowed once, hard. The Duke's composure did not break, yet something indefinable shifted behind his eyes, a door in a long-abandoned corridor cracking open. She stood, the child nestled against her shoulder, feeling his warmth seep through her worn shawl. The Duke stepped forward, very slowly, as though the smallest movement might shatter the fragile peace the child had found. "What is your name?" he asked, not as a formality, but as a man asking something of consequence. She spoke it softly. He nodded once. "If you are willing," he said, voice steady now, "the position is yours." There should have been triumph, or relief, or at least a heartbeat certainty. Instead, she felt only the quiet weight of another life settling into her own, a child who had known loss before breath, a house drowning in silence, and a man who held himself upright by sheer force of will. "Yes," she answered. The rain outside softened, as though listening. Neither of them knew then how swiftly one decision could reshape every fate entwined in that quiet room. The estate did not reveal itself all at once. It unfolded slowly, as though testing whether she belonged. The first days were quiet, so quiet she could hear the ticking of long-neglected clocks echo through hallways that had once carried laughter. She soon learned the rhythm of the household, the morning staff moving like whispered shadows, the cook humming softly to keep away the loneliness, the Duke appearing only at certain hours, silent except when necessity demanded speech. No one spoke of the Duchess. Yet her presence lingered in the velvet drapes still drawn, in the faint scent of lavender clinging to the nursery linens, in the way the Duke's gaze sometimes drifted to the empty chair across from him at the dining table. The child, however, began to change. He slept more soundly. He ate without struggle. His cries softened. He reached for her when she entered the room, little fingers curling in expectation, as though he had found something he recognized, something he had lost before memory could form a name for it. She did not consider herself important, and yet the household looked at her differently now. The maid who tended the fires began leaving extra blankets folded neatly near her bed. The cook offered her warm bread with honey at breakfast. Even the butler's stern expression eased into something like approval when she passed. But quiet approval is never safe from curiosity. The first rumor did not arrive from within the hall, but from outside it. It came with a milk cart driver, who, while handing over the bottles, gave a knowing glance toward the upper windows. "So the Duke has taken in company," he remarked, as though discussing weather. "A young woman, they say. Moved her right into the nursery." The maid receiving the delivery stiffened, her hands tightening around the crate. "Mind your deliveries and not your tongue," she said, but the driver only smirked and tipped his cap before leaving. Rumors, once born, require little encouragement to grow. Soon, they reached the seamstresses, the grocers, the footmen of neighboring manors. By the week's end, the town was murmuring of impropriety, of scandal too soon after morning, of a woman of unknown origin now placed in a position of intimacy. It did not matter that nothing improper had taken place. In society's eyes, propriety was not proven by truth but by appearances. She became aware of the shift one morning when she entered the dining room and found the Duke already seated. He seldom ate in company, preferring solitude, so seeing him there startled her. He looked as though sleep had eluded him again, Faint shadows lingered beneath his eyes, though his posture remained dignified. "You are spoken of in town," he said without preamble, his gaze fixed not on her but on the window where rain streaked the glass. She paused. "I suspected as much. I should have anticipated it," he replied. "No household can remain untouched by the world for long." The child lay quietly in her arms, his breath warm against her collarbone. She had learned to move with him, support him without effort. It felt natural now, though she knew nature had no part in it, only necessity and tenderness. "If it troubles you, your grace," she said softly, "I can eat in the servants' quarters, or perhaps remain unseen when visitors arrive." "No," the word came sharply, not unkindly, but with a force that surprised them both. He exhaled, softening. "You have restored life to this house. I will not have you hidden as though you are cause for shame." Yet even as he spoke the words, she recognized what he did not say. The world would not release its judgment merely because he willed it so. That afternoon, she found something left outside her chamber door. At first, she thought it was merely a piece of carved wood, perhaps misplaced by a servant. But when she lifted it, she realized it was a small bird, delicately shaped, polished smooth from years of handling. Its wings were folded as if caught mid-rest. It was not new, its edges worn soft by time, but it had been cleaned carefully before being placed there. She turned it over in her hands, wondering. It was not the sort of gift given lightly. The hall had no children old enough to carve. No staff member would leave such a personal token. She knew, without needing to be told, who had given it. But the Duke said nothing about it the next time they crossed paths, nor the time after. He simply watched her a moment longer than needed when she soothed the child, or ensured the fire in her room burned warm enough at night. Care given in silence can be more revealing than any declaration. By the second week, the hall could no longer remain secluded. The Duke's sister arrived unannounced, her carriage wheels cutting sharp lines in the gravel. She entered the home like a storm disguised in silk, every step crisp, every glance calculating. She greeted her brother with the requisite affection of the well-bred, and then turned her attention to the woman holding the child. "So," she said, voice pleasant but eyes like polished steel, "this is the young caretaker. How fortunate that such a one could be found so quickly, and so suitable for the role." The remark was not praise. It was a challenge laid in lace. The Duke did not waver. "She is indispensable," he answered, tone firm enough to still the room. His sister smiled thinly. Indispensable can become inconvenient when the whispers grow loud enough. Their eyes met, brother and sister, in a quiet duel of wills. He did not look away. But the moment did not end there. It followed them into the drawing room, into the halls, into the nursery itself. The Duke's sister lingered near the windows, observing how the child calmed in the caretaker's arms. Her expression softened, ever so slightly, but the concern remained. "You are aware," she said later, speaking privately to her brother, unaware that her voice carried through the open doorway, "that if she remains, certain assumptions will solidify. And once they do, the family may contest the child's position. They will claim unfit influence. They will say the household is compromised." The Duke's reply was quiet, but steady. "I will not lose my son." His sister sighed, not unkindly, but with resignation. "Then you must act. And soon." The caretaker stood in the corridor, the child stirring gently against her shoulder, the carved wooden bird still resting on her bedside table. She understood then that her presence in the hall was no longer simply a matter of employment. Her being there had become a question the world demanded an answer to. And the Duke, whether he intended it or not, would soon have to choose one. The proposal was not made in grandeur, but in a quiet room lit only by the soft glow of evening embers. The Duke stood near the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back as though holding himself together by sheer force. She held the child against her shoulder, her fingers tracing slow, reassuring circles along his back. The household had fallen silent for the night. Even the old clock in the hallway seemed to breathe more softly. "I ask this of you not for my sake," he said, the words low, steady, yet tremoring at the edges. "They mean to take him. They claim grief has unmoored me. They whisper that I am unfit. And in the absence of defense, whispers grow into law. She did not answer immediately. The child's tiny hand rested against her collarbone, his breath a faint warmth beneath her chin. She could hear her own pulse, steady but uncertain. In truth, she had known this moment was coming. Every glance from visitors, every hushed voice beyond half-closed doors, every tightening of his jaw when family assumed authority over his child, all of it had pointed here. "You wish me to act as your wife," she said quietly. "For 1 week," he replied. "Long enough for the court to believe the household is stable. That my son is not alone in my care." He did not say, "long enough to silence them." He did not need to. She remembered the gossip that had cut her life in 2 mere months before, the broken engagement, the neighbors' pitying stares, the way the world shifted its regard the moment misfortune touched her name. She knew how swiftly society judged, how swiftly it condemned, and how rarely it forgave. "Your Grace," she murmured, "if it is discovered to be false." "It will not be," he said, though the certainty in his voice wavered like a flame in breeze. "We must appear as though we are united. As though we are—" He hesitated, the word heavy. "A family." The child stirred, and she rocked him gently, though her own thoughts were anything but steady. She had come into this home out of necessity. Yet now, the shape of her days had changed. The child's small fingers had found her. His quiet breaths had pressed into her shoulder. His life, fragile and wordless, had threaded itself into hers. And the Duke, once merely a distant figure of quiet sorrow, had begun to reveal himself in small, piercing ways. The wooden bird left at her door. The way his voice softened when speaking of the child. The moment, only yesterday, when he had draped his coat over her shoulders without a word when the evening draught crept in. These were not gestures of a man indifferent. She lifted her gaze to him. "I will do it." The relief that crossed his face was not triumphant, nor even grateful. It was something far more vulnerable, like a man allowed to breathe after standing too long underwater. From that morning on, the hall changed again. Carriages were prepared for public appearances. She was fitted for a gown, not extravagant, but dignified, soft in color and modest in cut. The seamstress made no remarks beyond those necessary for her work, though her eyes flickered with questions she did not speak aloud. The servants moved differently now, more carefully, as though aware that every glance, every movement, every silence carried weight. The Duke, too, changed in subtle ways. He stood nearer to her when they walked. He spoke her name with the gentleness of a man who feared he might break what was held too tightly. When the child fussed, they attended together, their hands moving in quiet accord, without need for words. Yet it was in the late hours of evening that the shift became unmistakable. One night, after the household had retired, she found him in the library seated beside the cradle, the faint golden lamplight softening the hardened planes of his face. He did not hear her approach. His gaze was fixed upon the child with an expression carved from grief and devotion entwined. "She was not in love with me," he said, his voice a quiet confession, not intended to wound. "The marriage was arranged. She did her duty with dignity. I respected her for it. But the house was always—" His throat tightened. "Silent." She sat across from him, though she did not interrupt. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, as though seeing the first person he could speak to without cost. "When she died," he continued, "there was grief, yes, but also guilt. Not for her passing. I would have traded my life for hers if offered. But guilt that I mourned the idea of her more than the woman herself. I do not know if that makes me heartless or human." She shook her head, soft but certain. "It makes you honest." His eyes lowered, the fire casting amber shadows across his hands. "And you?" he asked. "Whom did you love?" The question caught her unprepared, though she should have anticipated it. Love had once been a word spoken freely in her life, easy, hopeful, woven with future promises. But now, "I loved someone who valued comfort over courage," she said at last. "He chose security, his family's approval, and a life unchallenged. I suppose I cannot fault him for it. I only wish he had not made me believe his heart was stronger than it was." The Duke's gaze softened, not out of sympathy, but recognition. Silence settled between them, not empty, but full. The child slept peacefully, his small breath steady. The fire crackled softly, warm and intimate. Their eyes met. In that moment, the unspoken truth between them was not yearning, nor longing, nor passion. It was understanding. The kind that does not flare brightly, but roots itself quietly and deeply. She reached to adjust the blanket around the child, and his hand moved instinctively, his fingers brushing hers. They stilled, not startled, but suspended, as though the room itself held breath. A touch that was not accidental. A touch that lingered. A touch that said everything neither dared to speak. Yet they did not lean closer. Did not cross the delicate boundary between closeness and surrender. Instead, he spoke softly, his voice rough with something unguarded. "What if 1 week is not enough?" She did not answer. Her heart beat once, twice, thrice, each pulse heavy with both hope and dread. Because she knew, in that flicker of a moment, that 1 week had already changed everything. The night of the winter assembly arrived with a cruel precision of inevitability. Hawthorne Hall had been quiet for days, but that quiet had not been peace. It was the held breath before judgment. The Duke had received the invitation not as courtesy, but as warning. Society wished to see for itself whether scandal had taken root beneath his roof. He had not asked her whether she wished to attend. He simply came to her chamber door, the child in his arms, his voice low. "We must be seen," he said. "Together." She nodded, though her heartbeat fluttered like wings trapped beneath bone. The gown prepared for her was simple yet elegant, ivory muslin trimmed with soft lace, the color that suggested bridal grace without declaring it. Her hair was arranged loosely, a few strands allowed to fall in gentle waves, softening her features. When she stepped into the grand hall of the assembly, a hush fell like snow across the room. Chandeliers blazed overhead, their flames reflected in polished marble floors. Gowns shimmered like fields of flowers, violins murmured in slow waltz, and yet all eyes turned toward her, not with welcome, but with scrutiny sharpened to a blade's edge. The Duke stood beside her, tall and controlled, the quiet force of him unmistakable. His hand did not touch her, but its absence felt deliberate, as though the slightest contact might reveal too much. They walked through the hall as though moving through deep water. Every whispered remark echoed against the marble. So soon after morning. She was nothing before she came to his house. No lineage, no name. And the child, who can say her influence is proper? She heard every word though none were spoken loudly. Her chin remained lifted, her step steady. Yet beneath her calm, a tremor formed, not of shame, but of fear that this moment could undo everything she had begun to build. Halfway across the room, a familiar voice cut the air like a sharpened quill dipped in honey. "My, how the Duke has surprised us all." A gentleman stepped forward, a lord known for charm polished finer than his morals. He was beautifully dressed, his expression pleasant, his eyes predatory. He bowed to the Duke and then let his gaze fall upon her. "And this must be the woman who has so captivated your household. How remarkable." His smile deepened. "I recall hearing she once sought a most eager match. A promising one. Until certain unfortunate revelations." He allowed the silence to stretch, giving room for onlookers to lean closer, hungry. Her breath caught, not because of the past, but because it was spoken aloud by someone who wished to wound. The Duke's voice came slow, measured, but its undertone was steel drawn from its sheath. "You will choose your next words with care." "Oh, come now," the Lord replied lightly. "We only speak of what everyone knows." A woman with a ruined engagement, no family name, suddenly installed in the nursery of a grieving widower? One can hardly resist drawing conclusions. A soft ripple of agreement, half suppressed, moved through the crowd. She felt heat rise in her chest, not anger, but humiliation, raw and familiar. The Duke stepped forward, close enough to end all pretense of civility. The room stilled. Even the musicians faltered. "You speak of her as though you understand her character," he said, voice quiet enough that those listening had to lean closer. "Yet you know nothing of her. You know only gossip and cowardice." The Lord's smile thinned. "And what do you know, your grace? That she arrived at your door conveniently when affection was needed? That the child clings to her as though—" "Enough." The Duke's voice cracked like thunder on still air. The hall fell silent. Every face turned. He did not look away from his opponent, yet his next words were spoken to all. "You question her presence. You question her worth. But it is she who saved my son when grief drowned this house. It is she who held him when no one else could soothe him. She came with nothing, yes, nothing but gentleness, nothing but courage. And that alone has more value than any title here." For one breath, too, the room did not move. His gaze shifted, finally, to her. And in that glance was something unveiled, something too exposed, too tender. She could not bear it. The air grew too tight around her ribs. The chandeliers blurred. The murmurs rose again, thick and suffocating. She turned, leaving the ballroom before the music could resume, her steps swift, her pulse wild. The corridor outside was cool, dim, mercifully empty. She pressed both hands to her face, fighting the tremor in her breath. She had thought herself prepared for whispers, but not for him to defend her as though his heart were already hers to protect. She did not hear his footsteps until he was near. She did not turn. "You should not have said such things," she whispered. "They will think. I do not care what they think." "But I do," she said, voice breaking. "Because when this arrangement ends, when the week is over, they will not whisper about you. They will whisper about me. And I will have nowhere left to stand." The silence that followed was not cold. It was devastating. When he spoke, his voice was soft, not commanding, not guarded. "Do you believe I asked for 1 week because I intended for it to end?" Her breath trembled. "Do not say such things if they are only born of gratitude. I cannot bear kindness offered as obligation." He stepped closer, not touching, but near enough that she felt the warmth of him, steady and grounding. "It is not gratitude," he said. "It is not duty. It is not pretense." Her heart beat so fiercely she thought it might break her. She closed her eyes. "Then what is it?" she whispered. The child's cry echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the hall. Small, searching, needing. The Duke's answer was quiet, but it shook the world beneath her feet. "It is that I cannot imagine this house without you." The words were a beginning, and a breaking. For she knew now that leaving would ruin her, and staying would ruin him. And love had already begun. Dawn came gray and trembling, as though the sky itself hesitated to reveal what the night had wrought. She had not slept. Her chamber felt smaller than ever, every shadow reminding her of the ballroom, of the gasping hush after the Duke's words, of her own retreat. The child lay in his cradle beside her bed, breathing softly, unaware of the storm gathering beyond the nursery walls. She knew what she must do. She had known it before her heart had allowed the knowledge to form into words. She gathered her cloak, her hands steady only because she willed them to be. Leaving in silence would be a mercy, for him, for herself, for whatever fragile thread connected them. If she severed it now, perhaps it would cause only a clean ache, not a wound that ruined the rest of their lives. But when she opened the door, she found him standing there, as though he had been carved from the very stillness of the hall. He was soaked with rain. His hair clung to his forehead. His coat dripped onto the floor. He had not left her door all night. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. "Do not go," he said quietly. She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "If I stay, they will destroy me. I will become nothing but a rumor given flesh. And you. I do not care what they say of me." "But I do care," she whispered, her voice fraying. "I cannot live under the shadow of borrowed affection. I cannot take the place of another woman's memory, nor stand in your home as though I belong when I have no right to your name." He took a breath, slow and uneven. "You speak as though your worth is something measured by the world outside. Do you not see? You belong because this house breathes again when you walk within it. You belong because my son reaches for you and no one else. You belong." His voice softened, raw, stripped of nobility and guardedness. "Because my heart has already placed you here." Her breath caught. Not because she doubted him, but because she feared believing him. A thunder of carriage wheels echoed in the courtyard below. Voices rose, stern, self-important, certain. His relatives had come to take the child. The Duke closed his eyes. "They mean to remove him today." She felt the ground shift beneath her. Everything she feared and everything she wanted collided in a single, unbearable moment. He turned toward the stairs. She followed without question. They descended to the entrance hall just as the great doors swung open. The Duke's aunt and uncle entered with the assuredness of those who believed themselves righteous. Behind them stood a solicitor, carrying papers stamped with red wax. "The matter is no longer one of opinion," the aunt said briskly. "The household is compromised. The child must be placed in a stable environment under proper guidance." The Duke stepped in front of her, the child now cradled securely in her arms. His voice did not rise. It did not tremble. "This house is stable," he said. "This child is cared for. And my household is mine to govern." The solicitor cleared his throat. "The accusations against you are not that you are without love, your grace, but that grief has rendered your judgment unsound. The court will expect proof of domestic order." "Then look," the Duke said, turning not to the solicitor, but to her. And she understood. Without hesitation, she stepped to his side, not behind him, not apart, but beside him. The child stirred, his small hand curling around the fabric of her gown. Her voice was soft, yet unwavering. "This child is safe here," she said. "He is fed, comforted, and held. I have been with him every hour of every day since I entered this home. You may accuse us of impropriety. You may accuse us of circumstance. But you cannot accuse us of neglect." The aunt's eyes narrowed. "You speak boldly for one without a binding place in this house." The words struck hard, and yet, for the first time, they did not wound. The Duke stepped closer to her, his hand hovering near hers, not touching, yet undeniably joined. "She has a place," he said. "She is the one I choose. Not out of duty. Not for the sake of appearances. But because loyalty, tenderness, and courage are rarer gold than any title. She stands beside me because I love her." The hall went silent. The solicitor blinked, stunned not by sentiment but by the clarity of the declaration. The aunt's confidence faltered. The uncle cleared his throat, suddenly less assured. Love, when spoken without hesitation, changes the balance of any room. The challenge dissolved, not in triumph, but in inevitability. The relatives withdrew with stiff farewells and colder expressions, but they left. The solicitor bowed, acknowledging the legal authority of a man who had spoken not as one unmoored, but as one anchored by choice. When the doors closed again, the house exhaled. She turned to the Duke, her eyes wide with something fragile and luminous. "You love me." He did not smile. Not yet. His voice was steady, reverent. "I loved you the moment he quieted in your arms." Tears rose, not from sorrow, but release. She stepped forward, and he met her halfway. Their kiss was not hungry or desperate, it was a vow. 1 year later, Hawthorne Hall was warm again. Laughter returned to the rooms. The child, now toddling, raced across polished floors. And in the garden, beneath climbing roses, she walked with the Duke, her husband, not in pretense, but in peaceful certainty. Love had not arrived in thunder or spectacle. It had arrived in the hush of a nursery, in shared silence, in hands that did not let go. And it endured.